Hey everybody, how are you? It's great to be with you. I tell you what, it's nothing like talking to the home team. Please have a seat. Let me start by telling you how much the President and I personally, genuinely appreciate you jumping into this critically important debate with both feet. And I want you to know that students, standing up for students, you sticking with us and helping the Congress know how important it is to college students to have some remote possibility of being affordable. And I say remote because almost all of you graduate with debt like my kids did, and accessible. And you know, I want to thank you for getting other students on your campuses involved and making sure that that they know what this is all about. I mean, I know they know because, you know, one of the things, if I can say at the outset here, one of the things that we focus on, and this has been my hobby horse since I have been a United States Senator. I got elected when I was 29 years old to the Senate. I wasn't old enough to be sworn in. I had to wait because you have to be 30 years old to, I mean, literally, you have to be 30 years old to be sworn in, but I got elected. The day I got elected, I was still 29 years old. And so I had to wait close to a month to be sworn in. And the first bill I ever introduced in the United States Senate was a bill to up the eligibility of people to be able to qualify for Stafford loan, for loans, federal loans to go to college. And I want to tell you why. I'm going to focus on students for a moment. I want to focus on your parents now. Maybe you experienced what I experienced. What generated my passion for this issue was not so much the help I got, because as Barack and Michelle and Jill and I talk about for real, just like Mike, and he's a really good guy, we talk about, we know, and this is not hyperbole, we know there's not a single possibility Barack could be standing as President of the United States, or me as the Vice President, or Michelle or Jill where they are, were it not for help. There was no possibility of any one of our families getting us to school without scholarships and or financial aid. And I was a senior in high school, and I was a good student. I was a lousy law student. I was a good student, and I was probably even a better athlete. And so I had a chance of schools looking at me to get me to come to school to play football. And I still needed some help because the schools I was looking to were only grant and aid operations. They could give you some help, but there wasn't, you know, the only two big schools, football schools that looked to me were Maryland and Pittsburgh, and they were big schools, and they probably gave scholarships. The other schools I was looking at didn't give scholarships. They gave some grant and aid. And my dad was a really proud, like your mom and dad's probably, my dad was a proud, decent man. My dad was one of the most graceful men I've ever known, and but he had great pride about his ability to care for his family. And if you read about me, people make it sound like I'm Joe Biden who climbed out of a coal mine in Scranton, Pennsylvania with a lunch bucket in my hand. My dad didn't go to high school. I mean, didn't go to college, and no one in his family had gone to college, but they were white-collar workers, and I lived a typical middle-class life in the 50s, late 50s through the 60s when I was in school. And I remember my senior year in high school, and we had just finished a baseball game in the school I went to, and I went to school in a little steel town in Delaware called Claymont, Delaware. I'm right on the Pennsylvania border. And my dad was the manager of an automobile dealership in Newark, Delaware, where the University of Delaware is. And one of the great advantages of having a dad who didn't make a lot of money but had ran a dealership For every prom, I got a new car. Now, you think I'm joking. And none of you remember the phrase, but I'd get to Simonize a car, make it shiny and look beautiful, and I get to pick whatever one off the lot, the used car lot, but they were nice cars. And I remember after the game, my girlfriend was a junior in high school, and I was going to her junior prom, and I got out of, the game was over, it was a home game, took my spikes off, put on sneakers, didn't shower or change, had my baseball uniform on, blew down, was now a 19-mile ride in my 51 Plymouth down and to my dad's dealership, where he managed it. Pulled up the spot I usually would pull, and I went in, and the receptionist's name was Mary, as I remember, and said, "Mary, where's Dad?" She said, "Honey, Dad's out in the side lot over there." So I walked out, and my dad, who was impeccably dressed, just a real gentleman, was pacing back and forth. And he looked up, he saw me, he said, "Oh, Joey," he said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I, honest to God, thought something happened to my mom or my sister or my brother. I said, "Dad, what's the matter?" He said, I went to the Farmers Bank, which was a state bank in Delaware, that financed a lot of the loans that people got to buy cars. And he said, "I went to Farmers Bank, and there was a guy named Charlie Delcher, the banker." I remember specifically, because I ended up going to Charlie Delcher to borrow money to open a law firm years later. And he said, "You know, Joey," he said, "they won't lend me the money to help you get to school. I'm so ashamed. I am so ashamed." That's the reason why. I probably would have gotten to college somehow. Maybe not that year, maybe not right away, but I would have gotten to college. But millions of your moms and dads, millions of the people you know, have had their pride stripped from them. The way they finance getting their kids to school is like I finance my kids. I have the dubious distinction of being rated the poorest man in the Congress and the vice president assuming the office of the least assets. I hope they were referring to financial assets. And I was making a lot of money when my kids were in school. I was making $60,000 as a senator. But they got into very good schools, and I said, whatever school they get into, I'll help them get there. My boys worked 30 hours a week in school. One worked 30 hours a week, also played football. One went to Penn, one went to Georgetown. The combined cost of going to those two schools exceeded then my disposable income. They both graduated significantly in debt. I was able to borrow against my home like a lot of your parents used to be able to do because we had equity in the home. I bought a home for a price, and it kept going up, the value, all during that period of time. And that's how I got them through school. And when my daughter and my two sons, after 20 years of school, undergraduate and graduate school, I sold my house and helped pay off the loans because I didn't need as big a house. No complaints. I mean, it's not like great sacrifice. We didn't need as big a house. That's how a lot of moms and dads used to do it. But this god-awful recession we inherited, they lost their wealth. $16 trillion in lost wealth for middle-class families out there, all in their homes or their 401ks. The stock market plummeted. Even though they kept up all their mortgage payments, the guy down the street had a subprime loan, and the guy around the block had one, and they saw all of a sudden their house was upside down. They couldn't borrow the money. So this has become a crisis, not only for a generation, but a generation of parents. Because if there's any parents in this room, you know the most helpless feeling in the world for you is to look at your talented child, or your child who's ill, or your child who has a problem, and know there's nothing you can do to help. So in full disclosure, that's where I start from. That's why since the day I got in office, this has been something, and one of the great honors of my life is I got picked to be vice president by a man who shares as passionately as I do the desire to make sure that college is accessible and affordable. That's a gigantic priority for us. And here's what we did when we came to office. The first thing we did, and by the way, I'm about to say something about banks. Banks aren't bad guys. For real, there's no need to demonize them. Banks went out there. We were paying banks over a 10-year period $60 billion to process student loans. So we said, hey, this is a no-brainer. They're not bad guys, but let's forget them processing the loans. We'll do it and use that $60 billion to help kids get to school, not just middle-class kids, but kids from families in distress. And a lot of families are in distress. So we took $40 billion and we increased the maximum Pell Grant by more than $800. And the immediate effect was, instead of having 6 million kids in college as a consequence of Pell Grants 2 years ago, 9 million. 9 million are now in college because of Pell Grants. 3 million more. It makes a difference. It makes a difference in their lives. On top of that, we gave an additional help to families by creating a tuition tax credit. There always was some form of tuition tax credit. We said, for every kid you have in school, you get $10,000 for the life of that student's enrollment in college. Credit, tax credit. So if your federal tax is $1,000, go to any four-year college or most two-year colleges, you've paid out $2,500 somewhere along the line, or a lot more. You only have to pay $1,500. In the neighborhood I come from, the family I grew up in, that's the difference between being able to keep your car insurance and not keep your car insurance. That's the difference between, that's enough to buy groceries for several months. This is just for middle-class people, not for middle-class people. I love these guys who think somehow $1,000 or $2,000 more to have to spend in a year doesn't mean much. In my own neighborhood, man, it meant a lot. And it still means a lot. We're fighting to permanently extend that tax credit. Every negotiation I've had is being charged and negotiated with the Republicans on debt and the budget. That's the thing they always want us to throw in. What do we need that for? It's not paid for, quote unquote. Yo, Richie, not paid for. How about extending $1 trillion in tax cuts, $800 billion of which go to people with a minimum income of $1 million? That's not paid for. I don't quite get this. And we also want to double the number of work-study jobs. Most people aren't familiar with those, except those who need it. Average work-study job is about $1,700 a year. That's the difference what you get to eat. And in some cases, whether you can stay in school, what your living conditions are if you're off campus. We want to double the number of work-study programs. But even with everything we've done to increase aid, we still know that 2/3 of all the students who attend college take out loans to pay for school. And they graduate with an average debt of $25,000. You get a diploma, and you get stapled to it a $25,000 bill. And if you're fortunate enough to have gotten into one of the elite schools, that staple bill is a hell of a lot higher. So that's why we made, and this was the president's idea all by himself. So the president came up with the idea that anyone with federal loans should never have to pay back more than 10, they have to pay back, you all have to pay back, but no more than 10% of your disposable income. That means after you pay for your car, your insurance, your rent, your food, no more than 10% of that. You have to pay it back. which means it'll allow you to get out with a debt and still work for a nonprofit. It means it'll allow you to go out and become a school teacher if you want. In most jurisdictions, they're making around, it varies, $30,000 to start. Well, that makes a lot of difference. It brings down your monthly payment if you're in the $30,000 range. If you have a $25,000 average bill, by about $150 a month. That makes a difference. That makes a difference. These guys live in a different place. They're not bad guys. I don't think they understand how much $150 a month difference makes to a kid getting out of school. That's what we've done so far. But we need Congress to help us do even more. Now you've all been engaged in this issue, and that is if the Congress doesn't act, interest rates on subsidized Stafford loans, federal loans, are going to double overnight on July 1, less than 2 months from today. We want to freeze that rate. We want to freeze that rate. Otherwise, more than 7 million students, probably many of you right here, many of your classmates are going to see your interest rates jump from 3.4% to 6.8%. That's going to average more than $1,000 a year. Again, these guys, I think they don't think $1,000 makes a difference. It matters. It matters. I don't know how many of you have an extra $1,000 lying around. Unless, as the other guy leading the other team said, take a chance, go home and get a loan for your parents and start a business. So why the hell don't you go home? Get your parents to give you a loan. Phew. You know, this week the Democrats in the Senate tried to pass a bill that would have stopped the rates from doubling. The Republicans blocked it. They wouldn't even actually let it come up for a vote. Why? Because they didn't like the way we paid for it by closing a loophole that lets some very wealthy people avoid payroll taxes. The way they do it is they say they'll take X amount as income, 100,000 income, and 5 million in profit this year. The profit is not the income. The profit, it's a way S corporations do it. Wouldn't have been a big deal to those folks. I think if those folks knew what it was, they'd support it too. Rich folks are just as patriotic as poor folks. They're not asking for this extra help. They know the deal. So let me say it again, because I think it bears repeating. These guys are willing to allow the average student loan to go up an extra $1,000 in order to protect the tax loophole for the richest Americans. One, in my view, I don't even think they would have any problem contributing slightly to in order to keep college loans from doubling interest rates. That's the Senate. In the House, most of our Republican friends have been against this lower loan rate from the beginning, when Congress first passed it 5 years ago. Then, just over a month ago, all 10 of the leaders in this particular committee voted for the budget, the Ryan budget, which doesn't even make any accommodation for the student loan rate increases. One of them even compared, one of the congresspersons actually compared, I'm not unfair, but I don't want to single somebody out, but I will. So rather than tell you his name, I'll read a quote. He compared federal student loans to, quote, stage 3 cancer of socialism. The stage 3 cancer of socialism. You all realize you're spreading socialism, don't you? Which is cancerous. I've been here a long time, man, but it's taken on a new dimension. Now, thanks in large part to all of you. A lot of folks are beginning to change their mind, including, fortunately, the Republican candidate for president, the presumptive candidate, as I understand it. Now they're saying they're willing to keep the rates low, but only if we pay for it by taking the money away from preventive health care. Things like screenings for breast cancer. This is not a joke. This is real. That's how they want to pay for it. That's a choice we shouldn't have to make. We're committing to working with these guys to find a bipartisan way to pay for this, but we shouldn't have to choose between keeping college affordable and keeping Americans healthy. That is a Hobson's choice if there ever was one. You know, my dad, God love him, used to have a great expression. He'd say, don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I will tell you what you value. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget and I will tell you what you value. Look, these other guys are decent people, but they have a fundamentally different value set than the president and I do. The budget they voted for isn't just silent on interest rates. It would cut Pell Grants by an average of $1,000 student by 2014. It would deny existing work study programs by 100,000. It would cut existing we want to double it. They would cut existing programs by 100,000. Look, it baffles me that there isn't a consensus in knowing we have to invest in education to help students and their families pay for that education. But they think it's more important to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on tax cuts for very wealthy people, good people, but again, who are not even asking for it. Cuts they don't need, cuts they haven't asked for. I strongly disagree, to state the obvious, but because there's no higher priority than us becoming the best educated nation in the world. A generation ago, we had a higher percentage of our population graduating from college than any other country in the world. Today, you know where we rank? In percent of population graduating from college? 16th. 16th. Forget the issue about equity. Forget about your parents' dignity. Forget about all that stuff. My wife is a tenured English professor. Has a great expression. She said, any nation that out-educates us will out-compete us. I believe, the president believes, it's overwhelmingly in the national interest of the United States of America to get every qualified person to college. It's just that simple. And by the way, 60% of all the new jobs created in the next 10 years are going to require an education beyond high school. 60%. The days of making it with a high school education into the middle class are virtually gone. There's always exceptions. But what are we talking about here? I'm supposedly an expert on foreign policy. That's how I lots of times get introduced. Not long ago, I was at a conference with a whole lot of experts from around the world and the country on national security. One of the closing questions I was asked is, what is the single most important thing the United States can do to maintain its security edge over the next 20 years? The answer to me was simple. Have the best educated population in the world. It's in our national interest. Look, the middle class has been devastated by this recession. Absolutely devastated. Do you know a single person, poor, middle class, or wealthy, that if you ask the parent, do you want your kid to go to college, that says no? I don't know anybody. It may be a 2-year college. It may be special training or a 4-year college or graduate school. but it's the aspiration of every parent, rich and poor. And it's a foundation upon which this middle-class dream has been built. I love these guys. They say, we think small. It acts like the people in my neighborhood grew up saying all we wanted to be able to live in a decent house, which we do, in a safe neighborhood, which we do, having a good school, which we want, being able to send our kids to college if they want to go, and maybe be able to take care of our parents in their elderly, in their waning years, and with a faint hope that you won't rely on your own children when you get that age. That's all part of what constitutes the middle class, but there's one other thing, and you know it. I was raised in a family where my mother and father never doubted I could be whatever I wanted to be. Never doubted that I could be vice president, president, chairman of the board, whatever. Same with my sister, who was genuinely smart. But seriously. Also, hoped and believed my brother wanted to be a millionaire, he could be a millionaire. It's not like we have cabin notions of middle-class people, like we just dream that we're just going to have a house. But man, you pull out of that equation the ability to get your kid to college. Whether it's true or not, in the minds of the middle-class families I grew up with and now know, that whole house of cards begins to crumble. This is about restoring not only the middle class, but the dream of the middle class, from which the whole country benefits. When the middle class is doing well, the wealthy do very well, and the poor have a chance. They have a ladder up. They have a vehicle. With your help, I'm confident, and I'm not being gratuitous here. With your help, I'm confident we're going to be able to keep interest rates from doubling. Because now is the time, not the time to make it harder for students to be able to pay for their college or for their college loans. The President and I are going to keep up this fight, and we're glad you're on our side. We need you very badly. So don't leave this White House today without committing to me you'll make a commitment to redouble your efforts. We need to keep the pressure on. So please, tell all the students you work with to call or email their members of Congress. Tell them to tweet with the hashtag, "Don't double my rate." Tell them to participate in rallies on their campuses around the country. Tell them not to give up until Congress sends the President a bill that stops the doubling of those rates. You're an incredible generation. That's not hyperbole either. Your generation and the 9/11 generation before you are the most incredible group of Americans we have ever produced. You volunteer more than my vaulted generation of the 60s. 2.8 million of you since 9/11 have volunteered to serve in the United States military. 2.2 million have strapped on boots that have taken them across the scorching sands of Iraq or the God-forbidden landscape of Afghanistan. Thousands of fallen angels. And you hear them tell me, and I read, that your generation is not ready to take on responsibility. God. Folks, your generation is in the cusp of the most incredible change in world history. Not because of Barack Obama and Joe Biden, because of the time in which you live. Your generation is going to live through us being able to make solar energy as cheap as gas, as coal. Your generation is going to see in the near term the ability to literally target cancer cells through the bloodstream, making sure that no healthy cell is killed. Your generation is going to see the regeneration of organs, the regrowing of organs, so they don't have to wait for days and months in the hope of getting an organ transplant to stay alive. Your generation is going to see so much because you're part of such an incredibly bright, talented group of women and men. But a lot of it depends on us remaining the most innovative, best educated nation in the world. I know sometimes you read that Biden's the White House optimist, like as my grandpop used to say, like I'm the guy that fell off the turnip truck yesterday, you know, that was his expression. Hell, I've been here longer than all of them. I'll end by saying I got elected when I was 29. I was characterized as an optimistic, idealistic young man from a modest background. They used to kid me and say, I'm the first United States Senator I ever knew. But folks, I give you my word as a Biden, I am more optimistic about your future, more optimistic about this country than I've ever been in my whole life. Again, not because of Barack and me, because of what y'all are made of, man. We are better positioned than any nation in the world to be the leading economy in the world in the 21st century. We are better positioned because of the system we have, where you can breathe free air, where, as Steve Jobs says, you can think different. Innovation only is generated in countries where you can challenge orthodoxy, where you can think different, where you're encouraged. Change only comes through challenge. So let's make sure your generation, once again, is intellectually the best equipped generation in the world. But we can't do it. We can't do it without college affordability. And it's a small but considerably important part of the puzzle, that you don't let these interest rates rise. God love you all. Thank you, and may God protect our troops. Thanks. See you all. Thank you so much. Thanks, folks.